Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and every gorgeous person out there. I would like to welcome you all to the Virtua channel. And here is a bit of a special one today because it's the VRCLens tutorial. Now, as you guys know, I am a filmer and cinematographer in VRChat, and I have been doing this for a good couple of years, working with tons of cool companies, some awesome collaborations with creators, and also sharing some of my own creations out there, which you may have seen. And all of it is to do with a fantastic tool called the VRCLens. Now, this is a fantastic, glorious filming tool developed by Hirabihi, and you can find them on Twitter at hibihira_me. Please do support their project for this camera, and it is absolutely essential to getting that wonderful film and cinematic looks. So here's a little tutorial on the basics, as well as some advanced practices that you can do and how you can film beautiful and action-packed scenes and films in your own time on the space of VRChat. So let's get digging. Now, before we do start, these are some of the extra bonus tools that I do use for my own personal use, so that way I can always get a professional finish with all of my filming. And I will recommend these tools as very essential for any filming, or even if you want to upgrade your streams. So currently, I'm using the tools of OVR Advanced Settings, which allow me to move my play space around so I can take off and fly off into the distance. As well as I am using OVR Smooth Trackings. This way, my tracking will always be as clean as possible and doesn't have that jittery sort of look whenever you stamp your feet or maybe clip your hip every now and then. This will also remove some of the shake from your own hands, which allows for holding cameras as well as other tools a lot more smoothly and has that more natural look to it. Lastly, I am using Excess Overlay. Now this allows me to pop up windows in front of my view as well as customize how they respond and how they attach to my movements. This is very useful to sort of keep an eye on all of my screens as well as all of my applications that are running at any given moment. But for now, let's go over some of the basics. First off, you want to actually purchase the VRCLens. This is a Unity add-on for your avatars in VRChat. This is not a native VRChat tool. This is something that you must purchase an add-on to your own personal avatars. That way, you have the tools as necessary. Thankfully, the tool is very easy to set up. All you need are the necessary packages installed for avatars on the SDK3 system for VRChat in Unity 2019. Once you have the basics of your avatar all set up, you want to apply the VRCLens as the last thing you apply to anything. The reason being is because it duplicates and reapplies a whole new controller scheme for your avatar. And if you do this beforehand, this may potentially mess up tons of work and hours of things that you have just done for your avatar. So please do this as a last step. Now, applying the VRCLens is very simple. All I need to do is take the little prefab, drop it into the hierarchy, and then select both the avatar controller, and its animators. And all this is explained, and it will stop you from applying the lens if you do not have the right things set up. Everything here is written in English, but it's also native to Japanese as well as other languages. Now, thankfully with the VRCLens, you can always adjust the rotation and the positioning, as well as some of the scales of the tools to match your avatar. Personally, I always tend to rotate my camera lens just a little bit upwards on my hand. This way, it's a little bit easier to hold in my controller. And for reference, I am using the Valve Index controllers, which have a lot more natural hand feel. Also, personally, when applying any of the settings for the VRCLens, I hit everything on the board. I want both the grid, I want the horizon adjust, as well as a bunch of other things as well. I don't necessarily need the disable button, but you can always have that for your own personal tastes. Please make sure to select your proper graphics card and resolutions, as this will affect how the camera performs on your own system. The prefab will also ask for your preference on the streaming tool. It's either for a direct cast or for applying it to your VRChat camera. I will go into a little bit of detail on why that is important later on down the line. However, if you prefer your frame rate straight away, I would highly recommend having direct cast on. Once you've set up all of your preferences and choices for the VRCLens, hit that apply button and test out your avatar. Thankfully, the VRChat Creative Companion now gives you all the necessary tools for avatar creation, including an avatar simulator which allows you to see whether your camera has applied properly. Once you've made sure that you have applied the right layers to your avatar descriptor, you can then test this out. You should see the VRCLens menu pop up, and please quickly enable that and make sure that does pop up. If all does, you're all Gucci. Upload and get into game. Thankfully, the VRCLens is also desktop compatible. This does not require virtual reality to function, and in some cases can be a little bit easier for some people. However, when you want to get into more advanced stuff, that is when you want to get the VR because you want both hands as well as the joysticks. However, the system is also quite easy to use on the Vive wands as well. However, with the trackpads, it does make it a little bit difficult to use the gesture controls, which, again, I will get into a little bit later on. But for now, let's hop into game. Once in game, all you need to do is open up your radial menus. This can be done by holding down the menu buttons for the VRChat menu system. Here are the basics of the VRCLens menu system and all the tools at your disposal. There is a point in the video where I will be showing the applications and how to use all these tools. However, let's go through a quick rundown of everything here before we do. For obvious reasons, the enable button does what it says on the tin, it enables the lens, and you will find that it sticks to your right hand. Now, when it opens up, for me, I have the grid as well as a bunch of other symbols and a horizon viewer, as well as this weird little doodad on your left hand as well. If you take this little doodad and touch the touchscreen on the camera, it will move this crosshair wherever you place it. This is the focusing point, which is probably one of the most powerful parts of the VRCLens. With the VRCLens, it allows you to control the aperture, the level of focus, zoom, as well as a drone control, which allows you to move the camera in any positions that you necessarily need in the world. And it also tracks both your avatar and a pinpoint that you get to manually all control. VRCLens also controls exposure levels, it can also change tints, and a bunch of other tools which allow you to do so much more visual editing before you even get it into an editing software. Now we're going to go through each and every single one of the menu systems to find out which parts do what. Now, I will admit that I do not know every single part of this tool, and some of these tools don't really work for virtual reality as they're more designed for the desktop area. One of the biggest mistakes that I always see when people get the VRCLens is how to apply focus. This is incredibly important to know and how to use, especially for either streams or filming, for either yourself or for filming others. By design, the focus is purely on the crosshair. You can think of the crosshair as a reference point for the focus, and it will choose the closest object that is near it. Right now, the crosshair for me is right in front of the center of the screen. So if I move away, you will find that the focus moves to the furthest thing back behind me. But the moment that the crosshair comes towards me and I come into frame, boom, it snaps in. This is quite useful for any photos or sort of like trying to just get a specific subject that you have and you just want to manually touch it up. But for filming, this is not an ideal way, as when you have a moving subject, the focus can snap in and out and can be quite jarring. Thankfully, there are options to negate that. First option is if you hit the Avatar AF button. This will pop a little white symbol on your lens. Now, this only affects the crosshair, so it only selects avatars, not world objects or distance objects. So for your remote actors, this is probably one of the easiest ways to make sure you can maintain some level of focus, but also you get to choose where and how that focus is, especially if the targets are moving. As you can see here, I am staying quite well in focus. However, in moments where the camera is quite stationary and the targets themselves are moving around, if the crosshairs aren't focused, then the avatar you want to select may be out of focus until they hit the little crosshair. And until that crosshair re-encounters another avatar, it will maintain that level of depth and focus. Now, if you hit the Avatar AF button one more time, that little symbol will now turn yellow. Now, what this does is it turns off the crosshair for focus, and it will always make sure your personal local avatar is always in focus no matter what. So if I'm moving around, I will always be in focus. No matter how close, no matter how far, no matter how much I'm moving, I will always be in a clear level of focus. This is probably one of the most essential tools for personal filming as well as streaming. In this way, you don't get that snappy, sort of, blurry look that snaps in and out. Now we're just gonna go explore the OSD display. Now this is more for heads-up display sort of purposes, as well as the display on the lens. You can choose to turn off the virtual horizon, the grid, or even the focus points and get rid of all that noise so you have a much more clearer picture. Now this is something I would normally use my overlay systems to do, however, this now allows me to do so a little bit more natively. I can now pop up the VRCLens screen on my heads-up display, which allows me to watch in real time what I'm doing so I don't have to move my cameras around, look at my hand, or hold any objects. It is simply displayed right in front of me. You do have the option to also move this around wherever you need necessary. However, it will not stick, so it will always go back to your front. There is a weird, neat little trick that you can do to break the VRChat radial menu system. So any particular option which allows for a movement sort of up, down, left, and right, what you can do is take your preferred position. I'm going to choose a left here. I'm going to click this and hold it. So as long as you're holding and you click, it will maintain that position at all given times. Now this is a very useful trick for a lot of different tools in the VRCLens, as well as some things for other avatars as well. So I highly recommend that you learn to use this trick as much as possible. This is also joystick sensitive, so if you want to have things move just a little bit but not too much, it'll always maintain that as well. As you can see, my thumb is not touching the joystick at all in the slightest. However, I am still maintaining my radial menu's direction because I hit the left, held it, and then pulled the trigger button, turning the menu off, but ultimately keeping the animation itself ongoing. The moment you do move your joystick within that menu, however, will negate everything you've just done. So be very, very careful, especially with those with drift. Now, there are such things such as autofocus and tools like this, which is a little bit messy here and there, so personally, I don't really touch this option very much at all. Fun fact, you will find the zoom button in a lot of different areas and a lot of different spaces. This is really, really useful, and I'll be explaining why later on. However, with the zoom, you are literally able to manually control how close and how far you want your lens. And this will work just like any real-life camera, from 35 mils to 60 mils and so on and so forth. Personally, I always keep mine around about 35, 37 millimeters, but also I will jump to 45s on the frequent as well. Unless I'm getting something very specific, then I want my 60s. Also, fun fact, this is also a tool that I use quite often in VRC, not to take photos or to film in, but simply to gaze off into distances and worlds to find something that is off in the distance that I can't quite see. Alright, now we're going to hop into our settings menu. Now, when setting up the VRCLens in Unity, you have the options to choose your image basic style. I always turn mine off. Reason being, this changes how the VRCLens responds to post-processing and how it renders things in camera afterwards. However, let's quickly go through things. You have the options of just simply having a completely raw camera, as well as a Filmic, which is a little bit more on the brighter sides. Filmic 2 tends to have a little bit more higher contrast, while also dropping some of the saturation down a smidge. HLG, as well as a neutral. However, personally, I always turn mine off because I prefer the looks of the world and the natural lighting that they give off. This is also one of the only ways that you're going to make sure that you can keep post-processing when filming. Now, what do I mean by post-processing? Now, this is game dev lingo for effects that are done to the cameras on your lenses. Now, this is for your VR or your desktop. This allows for things such as bloom and grain effects and cool things that a world builder will design for the look of their worlds. Now, for the VRCLens, if it is in any of the image controls, it will absolutely ignore all of this. I personally love the looks of worlds, so I always tend to keep mine off. Now, there are some really, really cool, neat little features, such as the filters here. Now, some of these I actually use more so than I do the native VRChat camera. So this is some really, really cool stuff. Big example, I can turn off everything in the background and keep my avatar or anything that's in particularly focus always in color, whilst everything in the background is live in black and white. I also have the options to make myself lovely and cute and all glowy. I can also drop a quick little spotlight onto myself, which does work with the distance. Now, green screen is very, very useful. However, you want to be using the green screen only with direct cast. This is because right now, as you can probably see, my suits and my blanks are all tinted a little bit green purely because of the bloom and the post-processing in my world. And we will get into a little bit more detail later on with that when we get into the menus. But for now, we're just simply going to explore both green screen and as well as blue screen for avatars that may already have quite a lot of green in them. Example, my eyes tend to always get cut out in green screens. Now, the hand button will simply stabilize the motion of the controls. So if your hands are a little bit shaky or uneven, this will simply interpolate that motion and make it a hell of a lot more smoother. It's almost like having your camera on a bit of a gimbal as you're doing your motions. Now, if you hit the button one more time, you get to turn that little hand yellow. What this does is it now makes sure that the horizon is always flat, as well as a stable hand. So if you tend to sort of twist or rotate your hands whenever filming, this will help negate some of that. And quite frankly, this is an option that I always forget, and then I always remember, and I'm like, God damn, I wish I should have used it. Alternatively, you could always turn it off and just have some of that natural shake to your hand. Now we're going to hop into aperture. Now, aperture, what does this do? This is the level of blur for your depth. Personally, I always try and keep my aperture dials sort of towards the 10s and 12%. However, sometimes if I'm just looking for a fully holistic look, you can drop that thing all the way over to 100% as necessary. But if you want a super blurry effect, you can always just crank that thing all the way down to 0. You can also just simply hit the increase and decrease buttons as necessary to sort of like pop in and out as necessary. Now we're going to talk about bokeh. Now, what is bokeh? Bokeh is the shape of the blur itself. For right now, I have mine set on circular. However, you can also change this thing to more hexagons, octagons, or even more square shapes to sort of emulate how pixels work in cameras, especially when in regards to light, spotlights, and sort of like cities and all this kind of thing. But for right now, I'm just gonna keep mine on a circle, so I like that round effect. Now, you can have things set to a manual or to a automatic system. However, I always keep mine manual, but this does not mean I turn it off. I always keep mine on the white AV in the top left corner. Now, choosing your sensor type will essentially change how the camera performs in regards to how real-world cameras also operate. Personally, I always keep mine at 35mm, but you can also change this around to sort of adjust the levels and how the bokeh changes and responds to the depth of field. But for right now, we're just gonna keep most of this at its basic core. Now, some of these features are quite technical and will require some level of either experience or education in filming. Personally, I am entirely DIY. I mess around with buttons until I figure something out. So I highly recommend spending some time with this tool, hitting every single menu option you can and seeing what they can do. And hey, did you know that there's an option for your TikTokers and you YouTube shorts? Yes, if you hit the portrait mode. Now, what this option will do, it will rotate the entire screen 90 degrees for allowing for film and mobile photos as well as filming. This is very useful and almost an essential for TikToks and shorts and things you want to be displaying on mobile devices. This will also rotate how the screens and the touchscreens work on both your hand as well as the heads-up displays. You may also see a bunch of other repeating buttons as well, left, right, and center, such as the OSDs, or the tracking, or the zooms, and a bunch of other things like this as well. Now let's talk about the manual focus. This is a tool that I use quite religiously in all of my filming, and I'll be explaining how best to use that later on down the line. But for now, I'm going to give a quick demonstration on what that is and how that works. Hit the radial menu for manual focus. This will manually control exactly where the focus point will be. So I can manually control having the focus point right behind me, as it will always maintain in that focal point. And I can also manually move that at any speed to my control, to either to my avatar, or I can simply have those cool little like lens blur effects where it sort of like pops in and out of focus, and I don't have to do any of that editing in the post. You'll notice that a bunch of the UI will happen on both camera and your touchscreen. None of this will be popping up in the windows for recording. So with the red laser that you can see on my avatar right now, this will not pop up on the screen at all. This is just simply a reference point to tell you where the focus right now is with the manual focus buttons. As you can see, I can now snap this both from my avatar to behind me to my avatar, all completely manually for a little bit more of a natural and professional finish. But for the lazy bum that I am, I'm just gonna stick to auto-focusing on my main avatar. Now let's hit the advanced settings. These are all a bunch of cool little gimmicks as well as helpful, useful tools for filming and photography. Now, movie mode. This is very important for capturing the style of the world or the style of the camera. With the VRCLens, you need to choose between how the world is displayed versus how the VRCLens is displaying things. So for all my filming, I always use the native VRChat camera alongside in tangent with the VRCLens. This is very important to capture bloom. What is bloom? Bloom and post-processing are the cool little effects that worlds and world creators do to sort of give that little extra pizzazz and make light sort of pop a little bit more out of insets and sort of LED lightings and things like this. Now, hopping over to Direct Cast, what this does, it allows you to film with the VRChat camera turned off. Now, this will give you a lot more frames and be less intensive on your computer system. However, personally, I don't like to use it because I like to have natural bloom and post-processing effects in the worlds. And this is the exact reason why, as when I turn off Direct Cast or whenever I turn on the native camera, you can see the differences, especially in very bloom-heavy worlds. Without that bloom effect, lights just look dull and just sort of general structures without having that pizzazz and that pop that the world creators have spent so much time curating and designing for you. But I will use Direct Cast for green screen effects. Now this is because I am now actively using the VRCLens' ability to turn off filming in post-processing with the green screen, so I can capture any avatars or anything that I necessarily need to with the green screen without that green bleed. Now this allows for a lot more cleaner cuts and edits in your post-editing process. Hitting up the exposure menu will bring a wide variety of tools which allow you to control how bright and also change the color pitch of your image. So here, if a world is a little bit way too bright, you can always drop that exposure level all the way down, or you can crank that thing up for a blinding effect. My eyes, sorry. I always typically try to keep mine about the 50 level. If not, I always just tweak it a little bit to the 55s to 45s. It's a very delicate process. You can also simply hit the +3, +1/3, +1s for necessary EV dials. But for me, I'm gonna keep mine about 55%. There is an automatic exposure tool. Now this can be quite useful for moving between different sort of lighting environments, as well as keep making sure that avatars or different parts of the environments that you're filming do sort of stay within a rough exposure level. However, this can also mess up the natural sort of looks that you're trying to do so, especially in very dark worlds, as the blacks will then suddenly become a little bit more on the grays, all suddenly and without your control. This is all entirely subjective and personal to what looks you need to. However, I always keep mine sort of on the black and white automatic levels just because I'm lazy. At any given point, you can always just reset all of these options with the reset buttons. There are quite a few reset buttons left, right, and center, so keep an eye out for those options. White balance allows you to control the temperature of your image. I always keep mine sort of about the neutral levels. However, if I'm in quite sort of yellow or warm worlds and I want to bring that temperature hella down, I can simply hit the left button and simply apply a little bit of a bluish tint or bring the temperature down, so that way it's a little bit less intensive. Or if I want nice, warm, fuzzy feelings, I can crank that all the way up. Again, you can hit that reset button and it'll reset everything back to its normal way. And hey, if you're ever just needing a very, very quick selfie, all you need to do is simply pop open the camera, turn it on, and hit that selfie button and take a quick photo. What this does, it attaches the camera about arm's length away from you to your hand for that lovely little sort of selfie look. Now we're gonna hit up some of the really, really weird extra settings, and some of these I don't personally use. However, for certain filming and certain ways to get things moving, they are hella quite useful. Example, the avatar drop. What this does, it applies the position of the VRC lens to your avatar, so it will always be remained on a local space. You can move this around with the drone controls later on that we'll be showing. However, if you want to be keeping sort of an over-the-shoulder look, or if you want to maintain the camera in front of you in driving sims or things like this, this will allow you to do so. And if you're in desktop mode, you can also swap around whether the camera is on your hands or whether it is based on entirely on your head mount display. This will also change how the tracking works for when you're doing hand tracking later on when we're using the drone controls. You can also make the lens itself invisible both to yourself and others, so that way it's not so invasive when it's flying around. As sometimes you will see a VRC lens flying around in different events, and it can be a little bit jarring. So if you're in crowded spaces and you don't want to disturb anybody, simply hide your camera away. There's also this really cool, neat 3D effect. So if you want to do some 3D, this camera does actually emulate exactly 3D filming as well. Personally, I don't have any tools or needs for this one, but if you want to be in 3D filming and sort of, put on some glasses and stuff like this for cool 3D TVs, this is hella use for this one. Okie dokie, now we're going to hop into our little drone settings. Now, this is one of the most powerful assets of the VRC lens and what makes it so unique and special, especially for avatar and filmmaking in virtual reality. Now, this is all to remove the camera away from your hand and keep everything sort of looking at you as it is right now. First thing you want to do is drop the camera. Now, this option will be in quite a few places, and what this does is it drops the camera right where you're holding it and drops it into the world. So if you want to hold up and get a position ready, you can simply place your camera, drop it, and there it is. And this is where we get into some of the fun stuff. Now, first off, let's get used to moving the camera. Now, movement is done with a directional pad and uses your joysticks for input. What you can do is you can move your cameras forwards and backwards, left to right. Now, this is where having gestures for your avatar is very, very important. Now, if you do a finger gun gesture, what this does is it changes some of the options for movement in the VRC lens. Example, as I now do the forward and backwards on the dial, it will now move the camera up and down. This will not change how it moves left to right, however, it will only move the positions of its up and down motions. And then if you want to simply move backwards or forwards, change your gesture, and then you're moving backwards and forwards. One of the really, really cool things I personally like to do is simply tapping my thumb over and over again on the joysticks or any of the buttons, as these are touch-sensitive controls. So I don't have to press, all I need to do is just literally lightly touch and it changes the gesture. So as you can see here, finger gun, up and down. I'm now gonna swap to pointing as I'm moving forward, and now the camera moves forward. I can now move the camera upwards by going to finger gun and back forwards again. This allows for a little bit more live and easier control with your camera work. Admittedly, this does take some time to get used to. However, with a little bit of time and practice, you can do anything. Now, all of these gesture controls will also work with the angle controls as well. So if I just simply want to change the exact angle or how sort of where the camera is looking, I could just simply manually move this around by going left or right, up and down, tilt and pivots. However, by also going back to our finger gun gesture, I can roll the camera at any given point. Tracking is probably one of the coolest and most powerful tools with the VRC lens as well. Some of the tracking tools with the VRC lens allows for some powerful control over how the camera itself is moving. With hand control, what this allows for you to do is to use your right hand specifically to point where your camera is. This is something that I personally always use for a little bit of more of that natural handshake motion, as well as getting a lot more precise control. However, doing so will most certainly make things a little bit awkward, especially when moving around, so make sure that your play space is very well cleared of any objects. And trust me, sometimes I get myself knotted and tied up in so many different weird positions, and I'm basically doing yoga when doing some of these hand controls. This is probably where having the OVR smooth tracking is very useful, as this will eliminate some of that natural handshake and keep that motion a lot more smoother. You can have hand rotate as well as manually move the camera at the same time. So simply turn on the option for hand rotate and you can move this camera around you at any given point. So here in this shot, I am both using the drone controls to move the camera as well as the hand controls to manually choose how I want to keep my subject in line. This is also why I always have the grid turned on, so that way I can always keep my rule of thirds pretty much in line at any given point. Now let's explore a little bit more on the tracking. You can also control exactly how fast the camera is moving. This is a very new feature in the 1.8.1 update. What this allows you to do is to have the camera move either incredulously fast or have it move very, very slowly. And this can all be controlled with simply just your joystick and applying to different percentages. Personally, I always try to keep mine around about like the 60-70%, but also at the same time, if I need that quick little motions, I can have that cranked up to about 80% and use the pressure sensitivity of my joysticks to manually control how exactly fast at any given point my camera is flying. All right, let's have a look at the tracking of the self options. Now here, the VRCLens will choose different reference points on your avatar on how to track. You can also adjust exactly where this is. As you can see, the VRCLens right now is tracking my avatar. I am not manually using or moving the camera lens at any point. All I'm doing is simply moving my body around and the lens itself is calculating and tracking where I am. I can also tell the lens to look a little bit higher up. I can tell it to look at either my face or towards the bottom of my feet, or various different effects as well, which is quite useful. Now for the feet, it will just choose the rough medium or the rough sort of a guesstimate of where both of your feet are and choose that center point. And with any of these, you can tell it to either look a little bit higher or further, but personally, I always tell it to look at my face, and I always tend to drop the reference points down just a tad, as that way I can always keep my body in frame a lot more naturally. Depending on your zoom and your camera angles, you may need to adjust exactly where this is. Now we're going to hop into the tracking options. Now, the recent updates for the 1.8.1 update of the VRCLens allows for a lot of options with the tracking. First off, let's think about smoothing. Smoothing of the tracking allows for how snappy the camera itself will track motion. So for my own personal streams, I keep this set to about 65-70%. I can make this turned all the way to 100%, so that way the camera will move very slowly in certain motions, and it will take its very goddamn sweet time to make its way over to me. So this way I can walk out of frame whilst the camera itself slowly pans itself away and around to me. However, at the same time, I can then manually, with the same dial, make this thing very, very snappy. So this way I am always right in the center of the frame, no matter how fast I am moving around my play space. Now, personally, I love to have that sort of natural cameraman in the field sort of look. So this is why I keep mine around about 60-70. So that way I can always just pop in and out of the center, and the camera will be delayed just enough to have that sort of natural camera look. Now we're going to talk about the pivot. Pivot is now based on your left hand, whereas the VRCLens is based on your right hand. The pivot is this cute little green dot. Whenever you activate it, it will drop a point on your left hand. Now this is where you have the option to either swap between pivot tracking or personal tracking. Personal tracking, as mentioned before, tracks where your avatar, your personal local avatar, is. However, if you need the lens to track a specific point whilst you're moving the lens around using the drone systems, or if you're trying to have the camera pan or tilt in certain ways, tracking almost, then having the pivot system is probably one of the best tools for you. Also, fun fact, I actually use the pivot to tell myself how far away an object is in real space. The measurement system is based on meters, or in the basic Unity units. So if something's 1 meter away from me, it will give me a 1, and then if something's 2 meters, 2, and so on and so forth. Similar to the hand tracking as before, the pivot is entirely based on your left hand position and rotation. So whenever we go to move pivot, we can manually move that pivot around based on where we are physically pointing. So if I point upwards, my pin will go down, and if I move it left to right, it will move as so, and back and forth. This is where you can now snap between your pivot position, as I currently now have my pivot sort of towards the couches, and then I can move my pivot around the world, and the camera will track it as if it were a normal point. And then at any given point, I can return to tracking myself, all this controlled live. Now, one of the more advanced things that you can do is you don't have to drop the pivot for the camera to track the pivot, where the pivot is on your left hand at all times. It's simply whether in case you're dropping it or whether it's attached to your avatar. If I turn my green dot off and my pivot is off, all I can do is track pivot, and now the camera is tracking my left hand. This allows for some neat, awesome little sort of like hand motion or table sort of like controls, whilst also giving me that personal shake and tracking motions. But right now, all I have to do is just simply move my left hand around. This is also really, really cool for dancers or actors or stunts that you don't really want to be having full just only the body, but you want a little bit more action and flow, but only with the left hand. Also, if you want to make sure that your face is doing the necessary gestures that you need to, you can always stick on vertical lock, but this will only affect the VRCLens motion entirely. So this will only affect the angle controls as well as the movement controls, and keep it on the up and down axis as well as the left to right. This will allow you to keep your facial gestures and your hand gestures clear and clean. Alrighty, now we're going to get into some of the more advanced techniques and tools that you can use with the VRCLens. First off, gestures. I highly recommend that you go into the VRChat menu system and you change that your gestures are toggles. With the Valve Index controls, you have these little touchpads that allow you to sort of toggle on different options. I always have my mute button on my left hand, so I can always mute myself at any given instance quickly without having to go into the menu and hit the button, or I can turn off my gestures with my right button. This will also allow me to lock in facial gestures or lock in my finger guns when I necessarily need it. This way I can then lock in and have my thumbs ready and free. However, I will always be doing the smiley smirky. Next up, we're going to learn how to lock a menu in. Now, locking in a menu, it takes a little bit of practice, but once you got it, you got it. What this can do is you can set up a motion or a movement of your camera beforehand and then let it continue. So example, if I want to keep my camera rotating around me, but I want to have my hands entirely free to do things, I can very happily lock in that motion. So here I'm going to have tracking on my personal avatar, and I want to have the camera rotate around me as I move around, but I want my hands free to do my own gestures. So what I do is all I need to do is move the joystick to, example, the right, hold, and pull the trigger. Now, when doing this, it will turn this off, but the moment I go back into the menu, it will remember it. So now I can have that rotation whilst also turning off my menus, so I can do all the cool things without having to worry about my position or what I'm doing with my hands. To do this motion, all you need to do is simply hold and pull your trigger. Make sure that it is pulled and held in that position that you need to, and then once you go back into that radial menu, it will remember and hold that position. Then all you need to do is simply hold the radial menus, turn them off, and you're all set and good. Really, really good simple application of this is if I want to set up a specific motion of the camera in a room or in any environment and I need to make sure that either my face or my body motion is as clean as possible without me having to sort of look down, worry about these menus and where my hands are. All I need to do is simply preset, pre-calculate where and how I want my motion, pull the triggers, and then pop into the menus. And that's all. This does not work with any of the menus that have percentages as they already lock into place. This only works with certain dials of position left, right, up, and down. This is particularly useful if I want to maintain a certain angle on my camera whilst also tracking my personal avatar. So if I want to keep myself sort of in my rule of thirds, all I need to do is adjust the angle, pull that trigger, go back into it, and now I am always within my rule of thirds. So this way I can always have somebody to my left whilst also moving around to keep my tracking, but I'm always off to the side. But once you come out of that menu, it will then automatically reset. Whenever you're going through your motions, always make sure to adjust your stability as well as the smoothness settings to your likings. These are always things to keep in mind whenever playing around with the lens. Now, fun fact, did you know that you have not one, but two hands? Yes, and that also means you have two radial menus. This is something that not a lot of people use or know how to do. What this allows me to do is control different parameters at the same time in different menus. Now, this is only exclusively in different menu sections. If you're trying to control parameters within certain sections, at the same time, it will toggle between them. So they have to be in their own respective menu sections in order to be controlled independently. My own personal examples will be using the movement of the camera along with manual focus. So for a lot of my shots, this is what I will normally do. I'm either tracking myself and having the camera set along a certain path, or I'm manually moving it as well as having the manual focus controlled on. This allows me to sort of have those natural sort of focusing points as well as emphasize where I want the image and the audience to be focusing on. This does take quite a bit of practice to use, however, so take your time with it. Now, because the manual focus and the motion controls are in their own different sections, I can control them both at the same time independently. So if I want to keep everything sort of closely focused whilst also bringing things forward, I can do that. And then at the same time, I can then manually move everything and all my subjects into control. This will also work for things such as the zoom options, as well as a bunch of different cool things as well. Now, this is not currently a feature within the 1.8.1 update of the VRCLens, as the drone speed controls and the drone movement controls are in the same menu system. This will toggle between both of these options, and I cannot control them independently. It is either controlled one or the other. This is something that I wish to hope to see in the future. So sometimes when I'm particularly setting up my scenes, I will spend quite a lot of time prepping for the motions that I need to do, or also my own personal acting, as a lot of my filming of cinematography is both filmed on my own as well as I'm doing the acting simultaneously. The VRCLens is a wonderful tool for doing exactly that, as well as filming for other people. So using some of the tools such as the heads-up display or using your own overlay settings, and this way you can keep an eye on your filming and control things as necessary without having to sort of break character. Now sometimes in some shots you may see me with a little bit of a weird face every now and then because I'm controlling things with the gestures or my thumbs are doing some weird things as I'm controlling both menus at the exact same time. But for all of my filming, I always have two menus, two hands, always open. And yes, you can lock in certain menus with one hand, turn off that radial menu, and then keep the other menu open for your control. So what I can do normally is simply have a motion or a movement of the camera following my tracking, rotating around me, and then I can control the manual focus on my left hand. You can also adjust things such as the smoothing controls or any other menus, both with two controls. I cannot emphasize enough how useful it is to use two menus at the same time. And alright, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you take this tutorial well, and you go ahead and make some awesome films and cool little shots here and there. Or if not, just simply upgrading your stream look. This is a tool that I use religiously, and it's something I've been working with alongside for a good few years. And it took me all those years to learn and understand how these tools and how these options sort of meld and blend together to sort of give you such an edge that only virtual reality can provide. And please do support the creator on their Gumroad. It is only $10 to purchase this little gimmick, and you have it updated for you for life. And also the creator is always updating new features and cool content. So please do follow their social medias for all those cool updates as well. All right, thank you all very, very much. I have been your host here, VirtuaLilly, and I will see you all on the next one. Take care. Toodaloo.